Greetings, warm Pacific greetings, but not very appropriate today. We had a wonderful day yesterday, but anyway, warm greetings from us here in AUT, Pacific Media Centre. And it'll be my pleasure to introduce our first speaker for this morning, one of our keynote speakers, Ricardo Morris from Fiji. And he was introduced yesterday for a session he did yesterday, but I want to just add a few personal comments on the introduction this morning, because I think Ricardo is one of the leading lights in journalism in Fiji. And the situation in Fiji for the last 8 years until the elections was very fraught with a lot of problems for media, a lot of pressure on the media, and very difficult for journalists to maintain some integrity. And Ricardo is one of the journalists who's really stood up and not only setting a lead by example with publishing his magazine, Republika, and then also recently being elected as president of the Fijian Media Association. He has been an advocate, a very strong advocate for quality and courageous journalism in Fiji and the Pacific. He also had a role with the Pacific Freedom Forum, and those who would have heard yesterday talked alluded to this quite a bit about the problems of the pressure that he faced with having an advocacy role and also being a journalist in the regime at that time before the elections certainly put the squeeze on him that he couldn't really do both. But I wanted to say personally that we had a project. One of the things I'm a great believer in is actually industry partnerships with journalism schools and so on. And we had a team over in Fiji with the elections that won award, Pacific Scoop team, just in the Aussie Awards earlier this week. And it's many thanks are due to Ricardo, one of the students, Mads Anneberg from Denmark, who was on an internship with us and part of the program. He was on internship with Republika. And the team with Mads actually sort of won, as well as the team overall award, for best use of convergence media. Mads also was highly commended for a best international report, which was actually about a profile on Ricardo and on Republika magazine. So I'm just delighted to mention that, and thanks very much, Ricardo, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
As journalists, it's as a journalist, I like being on the other side of the camera and the other side of the microphone, but I realize that every now and then I have to do things like this, give speeches and talks. So, kia ora, ni sambula vinaka, and good morning to you all. I'm humbled and inspired to be standing in front of such distinguished colleagues and friends with way more experience and accolades than me. Most of you will be familiar with the media environment in Fiji over these years, before the election in September. But I hope to give you a bit more insight into the kinds of experiences we have had in the lead up to and after the general election. Some of those experiences have been documented in Pacific Journalism Review, and I would like to pay tribute to Professor David Robie for his important contribution over the years to Pacific journalism, education, and development. Perhaps an apt description of the media environment that has been bequeathed to Fiji as a result of 8 years of military rule since 2006 can be found in the opening paragraph of Charles Dickens' work, A Tale of Two Cities. They are words that, although written 155 years ago, can describe many of the social and political conditions in our world today, although for me it rings true for Fiji. And I'll quote those few lines. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was a season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was a spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. The theme of my talk this morning is on the post-election environment in Fiji, how we got to this point, and what needs to be done to improve it. While I'm speaking here in a personal capacity as a journalist and editor of Republika magazine, I also stand here as an advocate for my media colleagues in Fiji, who elected me in June as president of the newly formed Fijian Media Association. For years, the media fraternity in Fiji had tried to organize ourselves, but as we found out, media folk can be notoriously difficult to corral. In fact, we had begun our attempts to organize well before the 2006 coup that changed everything. And for a brief period in 2004 to 2005, a chapter of the Commonwealth Journalists Association was established, but then soon lost momentum and was forgotten. The media industry in Fiji during those years had fractured on many levels. It was not uncommon for some journalists not to talk or socialize with others over perceived or real slights or differences of opinion. And the now defunct Fiji Media Council was accused of failing to handle ethical lapses and controversies satisfactorily or fast enough. The Fiji Media Council had been set up by the owners and editorial managers of most of the country's major media organizations in the 1990s and had gone some way in the development of the industry, but ultimately it was not enough. We were divided, and it can be argued that such division was one reason it was easy for the military government to bring into force the Media Industry Development Decree in 2010. The government justified its actions with reference to some of the unscrupulous journalism practices that should rightly be condemned. And I should point out here, though, that the Fiji Media Council's legacy does live on in the form of the Code of Ethics for Media Workers that's embedded in the Media Decree. We realized a bit too late that we were all in this together, despite our personal political views or those of the companies that we worked for. And as the saying goes, united we stand, divided we fall. So it is a positive sign of the yearning by Fiji's media workers for an organization that would speak in their defense when not many would or could, and an organization that would provide opportunities for continued learning, professional development, and camaraderie. From early on in his rule, the Attorney General, Ayaz Said Qayyum, had said that a media law would be brought into place to improve standards and practices in the industry. In early 2010, a draft media decree was presented to editors and managers gathered at the Holiday Inn in Suva. We were given about 2 hours to read through the document before the Attorney General came to discuss the provisions with us. Although he said he wanted to hear feedback, he prefaced it with the words, "This is not a debate." When the decree was finally gazetted some months later, we found that he had taken on board some of the feedback, for example, by reducing the fines and jail terms for breaches. But many of the more worrying provisions remained, especially that relating to content which could be deemed in breach of the national interest, quote unquote. And that is a blanket term that is not defined and could be interpreted at will. And in fact, he was asked that when the draft was given if he could define national interest, but he declined to. And thus began the era of media regulation in Fiji. If the media was subdued after the 2006 takeover, and especially after the abrogation of the 1997 Constitution in 2009, it was truly intimidated when the media decree came into effect in 2010. And who could blame us? For many, it was simply a bread and butter issue. Do we continue to report views and issues that annoy the government, no matter how constructive, and risk a breach that could potentially land an editor or journalist with a fine of up to $10,000 and or up to 2 years in jail, and the media company a fine of up to $100,000? Or do we adopt pragmatism and self-censorship and live another day? A tragic result of the repressive media environment has been the huge brain drain within the industry. Many of the best and experienced media workers have left or been forced out. And in fact, Australia and New Zealand have benefited from the migration of some of Fiji's senior media workers from as far back as 1987, and more so in the past 8 years. Those who have remained have either been moved to non-controversial roles or mellowed to the point of silence. And apart from the provisions of the media decree, other rules and regulations are being used to keep the media in check. Fiji Television has a noose around its neck, with the company only being granted a license for 6 months at a time. Compare this with the state-owned Fiji Broadcasting Corporation, whose chief executive is Riaz Said Qayyum, the brother of the Attorney General. An FBC has a 12-year license and is also exempt from the cross-media prohibitions in the media decree. Just recently, a few weeks ago, the IRB Gold Coast Rugby Sevens tournament, during the IRB Gold Coast Rugby Sevens tournament, Fiji Television was forced to share with FBC the live feed of matches for which it had the rights. They were compelled to do so under the Television Cross-Carriage of Designated Events Decree 2014. Under this decree, free-to-air television stations must share any event designated under the decree as an important national one. The smallest of Fiji's three commercial TV stations, My TV, for which I had worked, was forced to take the feed, even though it did not want to, and had no advertising or sponsorship to run it. It also had to fork out a reported $50,000 for its share of the costs involved. Not only did this have an impact on the TV companies involved, it left viewers of free-to-air television with no other choice but to watch Rugby Sevens all weekend. This is truly ironic when you consider that one of the objects of the decree is, and I'm quoting here, to ensure the availability of a comprehensive range of quality television services in Fiji, unquote. And apart from the impact of all sorts of decrees and regulations on media companies, the environment that the media decree has created is not conducive to the practice of truly robust and critical journalism. Sometimes you get the impression that everybody with a little power to exercise will unreasonably limit journalists in their work. And it's not only the locals doing it. Just last week, during the visit of the Chinese President Xi Jinping, only the Chinese journalists accompanying him were allowed in the room while he addressed the Pacific leaders he was meeting in Nadi. Two veteran local journalists, Makareta Komaya of PAC News and Dennis Rounds, who's stringing for Islands Business Magazine, who tried to defy the ban on non-Chinese journalists, were removed by Chinese security from the room at Denarau. They were not even allowed to listen to an interpretation of the speech on headphones. Instead, they were told to get the official transcript of Xinhua News Agency. So even in our own country, foreign officials can exert their will on the media. There's also the fear that hangs over journalists and their media companies. Fear of breaching the decree and perhaps catching a fine, which could very well cripple any media company. This is even more so for small independent operators, and the overall outcome is that sometimes journalism presented to the people of Fiji is bland and unexciting. Infotainment and puff pieces can be safer and definitely more profitable. Of course, not all media companies face this fear. It is well known that the Fiji Sun newspaper is unconditionally supportive of Bainimarama's vision for a new Fiji, and will consistently praise any policies of the government and denounce anybody with a differing view. And if you're bestowed with an anti-Fiji or anti-government label by the Fiji Sun, it can make life and business very difficult. Companies that feel you are somehow anti-government will steer clear of your media outlet, not because they don't believe in what you're doing, but because the ramifications for any business seen to be supporting a perceived anti-media company can be damaging. The Fiji Sun has been richly rewarded for its loud and proud support of Bainimarama's government. Almost all government advertisements and those of the government commercial entities are placed exclusively in the Fiji Sun. This was done to punish the Fiji Times for its perceived anti-government stance in the years after the military takeover. In recent years, though, some government ads have begun appearing again in the Times. So how would I summarize the media environment in post-election Fiji? And I have the assistance of a veteran colleague here when I describe it as, quote, only slightly more informative than before the election. The provisions of the media decree still pose hazards that journalists and their editors must negotiate every day in a bid to have more balanced and open reporting. The issue of balance, while a vital component of solid and ethical reporting, has often been used in a cynical way by some journalists, some officials and government entities. Because they know that a provision of the media decree compels journalists to seek balancing comments before publishing any critical story, by not responding to questions from journalists seeking comment, they can effectively kill a story. Editors will not risk running a story without the requisite balancing comment, no matter how justified in the public interest or how long they've waited for an answer. We've recently begun parliamentary sessions, and for the majority of those involved, from the Speaker to the Prime Minister and other MPs, the Secretary General and the journalists covering Parliament, it is a new experience. Learning parliamentary procedure and understanding the standing orders will take some time to master, but we're getting there. In the meantime, the effects of dictatorship still hang over much of the process. For example, the Auditor General's reports covering the years 2007 to 2013 were laid before Parliament by the Attorney General and Minister of Finance, Ayaz Said Qayyum. The reports, of course, had been highly anticipated for many years. The 29 volumes reveal quite a lot about how the government departments spent taxpayers' money during the years of military rule. In some of the reports, the Auditor General highlighted dealings with government departments by Nur Bano Ali, who is an aunt of the Attorney General. She had been given a contract to organize a strategic planning workshop for Fiji's dairy cooperative, for which she was paid $35,450. According to the Auditor General, her company was then later appointed without a tender to restructure the dairy factory for its ultimate sale. The Auditor General highlighted the fact that no tender was sought for this restructure consultancy, for which Nur Bano's company was paid $562,500. And the dairy company that she organized the sale for was ultimately sold to an associate company of the Fiji Sun. And so last week, Nur Bano, along with a hardware company that was also named in relation to a separate issue, took out a full-page advertisement in the Fiji Sun, threatening to sue the Auditor General, along with the Fiji Times, Communications Fiji Limited, which is Fiji's largest private broadcaster, and the state-owned Fiji Broadcasting Corporation, unless they retracted and apologized. She also threatened to report these companies to the media authority for what she said was unfair reporting. In the same edition of the Fiji Sun featured the legal threat as a front-page story and referred to the advertisement inside the paper. And if that legal threat and Fiji Sun's reporting of it are anything to go by, then parliamentary privilege does not seem to exist in Fiji's new democracy. What I have described above is but a small snapshot of the myriad issues the media industry and journalists face in Fiji today. And it may seem gloomy, but I am an eternal optimist, and I can tell you, I feel hopeful about the prospects for Fiji's media. Perhaps one glimmer of hope is right there in the Constitution given to us last year. Section 25 guarantees access to information, and a Freedom of Information Bill is likely to be brought before Parliament soon. When it is enacted, this law will open the doors for all sorts of public interest reporting and hopefully compel government officials to be accountable and fair in all their dealings. Many journalists, while they may be young and have never covered an election until September, are aware of the contradictions they have to deal with in their work every day. There's also the sense that things will start to change if they persist in their role of holding our leaders to account and speaking truth to power. We are moving on, but with eyes wide open. The media decree must be drastically revised or done away with altogether if the media in Fiji is to be truly free and regain the vibrancy it was once known for. Which brings us to education and professional development. It has already been noted that the majority of young journalists in Fiji today have never worked in a completely free media environment. Many of them have grown up in a dictatorship and the repressive environment it entails for the media and have known nothing else. Now more than ever, we need journalists who know their craft, are well versed with the laws that govern our work and the context in which we work. If journalists stay well informed about the issues, they'll be able to develop the self-confidence to stand up to any threats or violations against them and be able to faithfully serve the public that depends on us for reliable and compelling news, analysis, and commentary. The Fijian Media Association, in creating a profile for ourselves, will look to develop ongoing training opportunities in which we will play a big part in designing and organizing. We realized that going on fully funded workshops in which we had no input or planning may not be the best way to develop a sustainable and self-confident media corps. We need to take ownership of our own destiny, and this will involve working with partners, including our higher education institutions, but ultimately determining what is best for us and how to go about achieving it. At the end of October, I was privileged to speak at the University of the South Pacific's Journalism Awards at the invitation of Shailendra. And in that speech, I quoted the American television correspondent Ann Curry, who described journalism as, quote, an act of faith in the future. Journalism, she argued, should do more than inform. It should make you care. This is what inspires me every day, and perhaps that's where my optimism springs from. The knowledge that journalism done right can hold such power to change lives and make governments apprehensive for no more than the words and images we use to inform and make people care. So, while Fiji's post-election realities may seem like the worst of times, I believe the best of times are certainly on the horizon. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Ricardo, for that inspiring and hopeful message for the future. Now, we've got a slight change here. We're going to I know you've got burning questions and comments you'd like to make with Ricardo, but we decided that the best thing to do is, as we started late, we will also hear from Shailendra at USP and also Nick Chesterfield, and Philip Cass is now going to share the rest of the session, and we'll have questions and comments for all three at the end. Thank you.
It's my very great pleasure to introduce the next section in which our speakers will be Shailendra Singh, who will be talking about media laws and political journalism in Fiji, and Nick Chesterfield, who will be talking to us about the continuing hideous situation in West Papua. Both of them will be well known to you as commentators on these issues, and I think that the best thing I can do at this point is to sit quietly and let them share their expertise with you. And we'll have questions for everybody, for all three at the...
Yeah, first I want to thank PJR, David Robie, and his team for creating the opportunity and the space for upcoming Pacific Island academics and journalists in the region. I had my first paper published in PJR, and for me it's thrilling to see my colleagues, Eliki and also Ricardo, also on the program at this function here. Okay, now my presentation is on media laws and political journalism in Fiji. Okay, now in terms of media law, all the attention and the focus is on the Bainimarama government and its punitive 2010 media decree. This is understandable because only recently media freedom in Fiji was almost on a par with Australia and New Zealand. But to really understand what's happening and how the legislation arrived at its current point, we need to go back in time. Consequently, my analysis is guided by constructivism, and this approach looks at trends and processes, not just individuals and events. I'm considering three key variables. One is the history of past legislation Often this is a precursor to future trends. I'm also looking at the degree of media freedom established in the country's laws, and also the extent to which the laws are uniformly enforced. There are some parallels between mine and Ricardo's presentation, and I think we'll complement each other here. Okay, Fiji got its first constitution even before colonization. It was based on French and US models, complete with human rights provisions. So we really had a very good start. It was designed by an Australian, Charles Herbert, and he was Fiji's first Chief Justice and also a journalist. Upon colonization, Fiji came under England's constitutional laws, including the Bill of Rights. After independence in 1970, Fiji's legal and political systems continued to be modeled on Britain with some recognition of customary laws. The 1970 Constitution guaranteed freedom of conscience and expression. Still, virtually all Fiji governments, elected or not, have threatened to toughen laws. So there's a history behind this. One alleged media indiscretion that is often used as justification is the ostensible incitement of ethnic tensions by the media. This is a trend. Such concerns have persisted since the establishment of Fiji's first media in the form of the Fiji Times way back in 1869. Now, during colonialism, the Fiji Times was accused of inciting ethnic tensions in support of a white Fiji campaign. One letter published in 1922 described Indians as treacherous. Now, even back then, this was unacceptable, and the governor even considered legislation to prevent newspapers from promoting racial discord. But there was no such precedent in the empire. During independence talk, the founding Prime Minister, Ratu Mara, accused the Fiji Times of opposing multi-ethnic cooperation. You see, the Fiji Times had its own idea about the country, about the direction in which the country should move. The leaders and the people had their own idea, and there was a clash of ideas here. And the Fiji Times was not shy about expressing itself in very strong terms. It was quite a powerful instrument back then. It was the only newspaper at the time, apart from the government-run media. Opposition politician K.C. Ramrakha even said, "We must strangle this newspaper before it strangles us." So this is an old debate, an ongoing debate. The question of stronger laws receded in the face of two key developments. One was the euphoria over independence in 1970, and secondly, the arrival of a competitor, the Fiji Sun, in 1974. So it was a lucky escape in terms of stronger legislation. The dwindling cloud of the white establishment, the buoyant post-colonial mood, and the harsh realities of competition forced the Times to drop its rhetoric. The paper reinvented itself from a publication of the elites to one of the masses. Okay, in this metamorphosis fit into a 19th century global paradigm shift. This is when market imperatives forced newspapers in many places in the world to ditch partisanship for the middle ground. Okay, this trend came late in Fiji, of course. Now, Fiji's most dangerous brush with censorship came during the 1987 nationalist coups. The Fiji Sun was a major casualty. It closed rather than censor. This is the old Fiji Sun, no relation to the revived Fiji Sun, which we have at the moment. We had the 1990 Constitution, which entrenched indigenous political supremacy and also chiefly power. Indigenous institutions, like the Great Council of Chiefs, were placed almost above criticism. This was indicative of the tensions between traditional norms of deference and media egalitarianism. Constitutionally, politically, Fiji embraced traditionalism to some extent. Economically, it adopted liberalism. This is the 1990s. Deregulation in the 1990s spawned a plethora of new media companies to the point of saturation. It was a good trend, and in some ways it was not such a good trend. Deregulation was marked by a bigger, brasher, bolder media making new strides in investigative journalism. This trend drove state media tensions to dangerously new heights. The media exposed the National Bank of Fiji collapse, implicating prominent citizens. Okay, there was a colossal $372 million loss. This is something that a country like Fiji simply can't sustain, and to this day, we are paying the cost. The Review, this was a monthly magazine, exposed Fiji's first political sex scandal involving the then Prime Minister, Republiika, and a female journalist. I was working at the Review at the time, and I recall this edition sold out in days, and we had to order reprints. The Republiika government ministers threatened stronger legislation, but the country was democratizing and craved international legitimacy. Instead, Fiji adopted self-regulation, deemed more compatible with the new 1997 Constitution's Bill of Rights. So this was a second lucky escape as far as stronger legislation was concerned. Constitutional freedoms coupled with deregulation led to a jingoistic media environment. The result, a proliferation of good, bad, ugly journalism. Market pressures saw the financially stricken Daily Post resort to headline stories like Parliament Ghost and Woman Giving Birth to Snakes. Okay, this was a new thing in Fiji. This phase did not last. Still, it was fodder for a government trying to justify the introduction of stronger media laws. State media tensions peaked in 1999 when Chaudhry became Fiji's first PM of Indo-Fijian descent. Again, there was a clash of ideology. The media, particularly the Fiji Times, had a different idea about how the country should be governed, what policies it should adopt. The powerful media had its own views. Okay, Chaudhry threatened a swift justice tribunal to curb what he described as a distorting, lying, seditious, racist press. But he was interrupted by the 2000 coup. Okay, yet another lucky escape thanks to the coup. Okay, the Spade coup was a watershed event for media freedom. Spooked by Chaudhry's fall, future governments intensified censorship efforts. The Ngurase government proposed the 2003 Media Council of Fiji bill, but it balked in the face of a fierce no media bill campaign mounted by the media sector. Back in those days, the media had no qualms about taking on government. It was quite a powerful force, and often it won the contest. You had the government backtracking. After winning a fresh mandate in 2006, the Ngurase government was poised to reintroduce the bill, but again, another coup, and their plans were interrupted. So 2 coups saved Fiji from harsher legislation. Okay, but it was the military-backed government embarked. This is the Bainimarama government that ousted the Ngurase regime. This government embarked on the most intense, sustained crackdown in the country's history. Examples, the Public Emergency Regulations, the Crimes Decree, and also the Media Industry Development Decree. The Media Decree established the Media Industry Development Authority. It criminalized what were once regarded as ethical breaches. Okay, MIDA, which is the overseeing authority, it can investigate alleged media breaches proactively. You don't need a complaint anymore. It has powers to search and seize under warrant. It can force the disclosure of confidential information, confidential sources, except in cases of state corruption. Of course, the courts can also do this, but I think journalists would prefer that the courts handle such matters based on precedents rather than MIDA. Okay, the decree bars material against public interest or order, national interest, or creates communal discord. Ricardo commented on this. You can see how expensive and how ill-defined this law is. It's open to interpretation by the government. Anyway, almost any way it sees it fit. The tribunal can fine companies 100K, publishers, editors up to 25K, other media workers 1K. These are not small sums relative to salaries, right? And then you have 2 years in prison, which is the icing on the cake. The companies are liable to pay up to 100K restitution. So if you have a grievance against a media company, you lodge a complaint, you win your case, you are 100K richer. Right? So the government is providing citizens incentives to dob in the media. The 2003 Constitution does have a Bill of Rights. This is the Constitution under which we had elections just a few weeks ago. It has a Bill of Rights that enshrines press freedom. Paradoxically, the Constitution retains the interim government's decrees. The decrees override the Constitution if there are any inconsistencies, right? In other words, Fiji's media decree is more powerful than Fiji's Constitution. I don't know if we have any such example in any other country. Now, what does the public make of all this? I wonder if anyone has bothered to ask or check into this, right? In 2003, a Tabot poll, this was a nationwide poll, had 71% favoring a lot or a little government control of the media. The Ngurase government won the 2006 election despite tabling an anti-media bill. In 2011, a Lowy poll found 66% approval rating for Bainimarama. 65% in the same poll said Fiji was headed in the right direction. The 2014 elections, Bainimarama's party won an outright majority. So this is yet another paradox in the riddles that is Fiji. Okay, I'm arguing that these results, the poll results and the attitude of Fiji people, I'm attributing it to something known as the hostile media phenomenon in the Fiji context. Okay, and this refers to partisan supporters' tendency to regard even balanced coverage of their political side as biased. This is similar to a negative view of oppositionism seen in plural societies such as Malaysia. Okay, so the Western concept of media watchdogism is problematic in Fiji's hybrid democracy, combining Western and indigenous systems. Media has to contend with indigenous respect for traditional authority, for one, ethnic-based partisan and also ethnic-based partisan political affiliations. It's a really difficult environment to operate in. In Fiji's political cultural context, overly aggressive watchdog approach could actually be counterproductive. It could turn the public against the fourth estate and strengthen government's case for tighter regulation. So what I'm saying is that media not only face autocratic-minded governments, you see this is very obvious, this is what is commented on a lot. They also face a somewhat cagey, untrusting, coup-weary public. Okay, extent to which the laws are uniformly enforced, this is another variable. Okay, the decree requires balanced coverage, this provision is ignored if a story favors government. This is the complaint we've heard from some quarters. The state, it gets even more absurd. There was a state proceedings decree that shields ministers from defamation in both their official and unofficial capacities. In Parliament, outside Parliament, if they say something, no worries about defamation. And this same immunity was extended to the media who report the minister's defamatory statements, right? And then, I don't know, good sense prevailed, and this decree was nullified in 2014. But there was such a decree at one time. Okay, some conclusions. On paper, Fiji looks good regarding freedom of speech. It has always looked good. The reality is something else. Fiji's constitutions enshrine media freedom, but the spectre of tighter legislation has been a reality, and this is due to history, culture, tradition, and ethnic politics. Stronger regulation was delayed by the 1970 independence, and ironically coups and also deregulation. We've had lucky escapes so far, but the respite was only temporary. Regulation is now a reality, the consequence of both good and bad journalism. There's too much power in government's hands, and there's too little space for media. And there is selective, opportunistic application of the law, which makes things really, really difficult for the Fourth Estate. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to invite Nick up now, and Nick is going to be talking about overcoming media myth-making, malignancies and dangerous conduct in coverage of the situation in West Papua. And after Nick, we'll have time for questions for all three presenters and so on. Thank you very much.
Hello, greetings everyone. Want to begin, first of all, I just want to say, as a descendant myself of several different First Nations in Australia and elsewhere, just to acknowledge the land that I'm standing on, and also the solidarity shown by people here in New Zealand, Maori and Kiwi peoples, for the struggle for justice in West Papua. Thanks for the opportunity to be here to share this conference with some truly dedicated frontline journalists, and especially to David and PMC, who've partnered closely with the West Papua media over the years since our first steps into the world of investigative human rights journalism. Look, this is a detailed paper, so I'm going to skim over most of the key points and save them until the publication in May. I've also got to apologise because I suffered from a blue screen of death at 3 AM this morning, so I lost my presentation to go with this, but I'll certainly be putting some stuff online that goes with that as well. So look, I'll get straight into it. Very few countries on earth have so brazenly thumbed their nose at international accountability and prevented free and unhindered media access as Indonesia continues to do with its occupied colony of West Papua today in 2014. Most of these other countries are regularly identified as pariah states and predators of press freedom with good reason. Indonesia's apartheid and brutal colonial behaviour in West Papua puts it firmly in the rogues gallery of anti-democratic countries such as North Korea, China, Central Asian republics, Fiji, Egypt, Iran, Eritrea, just to name but a few. West Papua's baseline media reality is that reporting West Papua is exceptionally dangerous for Indigenous and international journalists alike. Indonesian journalists too are under threat constantly by security forces and their employers back in Indonesia if they fail to parrot the Indonesian colonial meta-narrative that underlies most contemporary reportage on Papua. But as with all conflict areas, when the military are actively hunting and torturing journalism sources, it's highly incumbent on all media workers to engage in safe journalism practice. This is why West Papua Media has developed a robust source protection policy. The moral imperative of journalism, protection of one's sources at all costs, is still being threatened by a colonial attitude amongst foreign correspondents and commissioning entities that seek to dangerously sledge Papua journalists as activists and continue to treat credible and tested witness journalism as suspect without them ever questioning official sources such as the military and the police. All the while continuing to paint an inaccurate picture of the daily struggle of survival in Papua as simply an issue of separatism. It poses a deep question about mainstream media's institutional apartheid of independent, credible journalism voices from West Papua, and again its reliance on narratives exclusively from established power centres. I just want to get into some few little facts that I was going to have up there, but West Papua's media reality is grim, though occasionally we can get international advocacy to work. We did a few years back the Pacific Media Freedom Report, which also fed into the Reporters Sans Frontières World Press Freedom Index in 2012. And found that threats to media safety and freedom in the 18 months prior to July 2011, for instance, were at a record high, with Indonesian security forces engaged in kidnapping, extortion, illegal detention, assault, theft, intimidation, and several cases of murder against journalists reporting in West Papua. After the release of this report, which dropped Indonesia's World Press Freedom ranking to 146, there weren't many countries after that, the Indonesian colonial state apparatus was actually forced to tighten up its act a little bit, with several national governments forced to consider press freedom status in its dealings with Indonesia and aid, in accordance with their national laws on aid giving. So that actually brought the real figure of press violations down significantly in the years immediately following that first report. Because it was the first time that West Papua was treated separately as a separate entity to Indonesia. But back with the narrative, relying on a compliant national media and the entrenched timidity of Jakarta-based foreign correspondents to do any real reporting on West Papua, the Indonesian colonists of West Papua have long manipulated this narrative of West Papua by dismissing a highly complex struggle of Indigenous Papuan survival as simply a skirmish between a few badly organised penis-gird-wearing guerrillas in the mist and security forces conducting quote-unquote legitimate anti-terrorist sweeps, whilst focusing international attention on the corruption of its Papuan Rajas, yet not onto their military overlords. It characterises the experience of West Papuans as yesterday's news and the last embers of a dying struggle. And by failing to challenge this genocidal narrative, the current mainstream media environment is still collaborating in, quote, smoothing the dying pillow, precisely at a time when West Papuan people are actually reclaiming their own stories in an ever more sophisticated Indigenous narrative movement based on resistance by truth-telling. The convenient image of a Papuan resistance as favoured by Western media is exotic, primitivist and other, but it belies the reality that the Papuan resistance across the board is in fact a sophisticated, semi-urban struggle of educated people based on non-violence. I just want to talk about the way things are changing, or allegedly changing in Papua, according to mainstream media. With the recent presidential election of Joko Widodo, who's a populist wayang puppet mastered by some very undemocratic forces in Indonesia. His Attorney General is, his intelligence chief is General Hendro Priyono. His Defence Minister is Ricardo. All these people have got major black marks against their name for significant human rights abuses over the years. Many observers of Indonesia's colonisation of West Papua are expressing a long-held but very erroneous hope that this will signal change and usher in some kind of new transparency in the universally condemned ban on foreign journalists entering West Papua. Far from opening up the occupied territory to international scrutiny, the security forces are in fact tightening their grip on freedom of expression and the ability for independent media to operate freely in West Papua. As a result, we're calling on international journalists to do more to ensure they act diligently to challenge this myth-making. The power struggle that's now being played out by what we call the colonial violence forces, the Papua Police and the Papua Command of the Indonesian Army, against the new administration of Jokowi, are being done to prevent any change to the status quo of their colonial control and their financial control over West Papuan civilians' daily lives and their desires also for freedom of expression. Cynically utilising the August arrest of two French journalists, Valentine Burat and Thomas Dandois, these forces turned a new page in the intransigence of the anti-democratic forces that still run West Papua as their private business fiefdoms. Unprecedented harassment and manhunts of Burat and Dandois' sources and contacts, together with an attempted extradition request and security threats on myself. And I was threatened by the Papua Police with espionage charges for journalism activities inside and outside West Papua. I've shone a bit of a new, mainly European, but a bright light on the daily reality of so-called openness of Papua's media environment. The arrests of Dandois and Burat occurred during their investigation of security forces' entrapment sales of ammunition to villagers. And it was one of the first attempts by foreign journalists on the ground in Papua to investigate the long-running war in the highlands that's displaced tens of thousands of people over the last couple of years. At times where people who have attempted to engage with international media, they've been repeatedly hauled in by Indonesian police for often brutal interrogation, even people who have just talked to them on the streets. In recent years, including interrogations from the Australian-funded Detachment 88 Counter-Terror Unit. Media and human rights activists have even been murdered for challenging the official narrative at inconvenient times, such as the Indonesian President's visit to Serong recently. And most of these murders can fortunately be traced back to their exposure, either deliberately or through lack of care by foreign journalists. So while we need to ask a whole series of critical questions, we need to begin with where reportage and journalistic conduct has gone wrong and gone right in Papua. So where has it gone right? Since 2007, West Papua media has been involved with, fixed or fact-checked close to 3,000 external media stories at an average of 7 per week across the planet, and with different media from radio, all media. The majority of these articles have been news agency stories and stories reported from newsrooms outside of Papua. Most have been simply putting people in touch with civil society representatives. Occasionally it involves sourcing real-time video and photographic material and baseline or background data. Every few weeks or so, we receive a request from assistance from international media companies, freelance journos, filmmakers, to provide advice and contacts for going in undercover to West Papua. Part of the reason we started a secure smartphone supply and camera training project was to circumvent the difficulties involved in smuggling in journalists to countries where their presence is illegal. Simply put, journalists are usually large, they stand out, and they're very difficult to hide in a backpack. It's far easier and far safer to smuggle footage on a micro SD card, of which desperation is the only limit to where it can be hidden. With only 2 foreign journalist permits issued to visit West Papua in the last 24 months, West Papua Media uses its unique perspective of having the only credible independent media network organisation, that's our partners as well as our own stringers, to be able to fix clandestine journalism missions inside West Papua. And we juxtapose the journalistic ethics of accessing Papua according to the legal official channels versus the successes of working underground with clandestine methods, illegal entry, and secure digital and safe witness broadcasting techniques. These techniques are fundamental to the protection of sources, and whilst they do not rely exclusively on technology, they do require an absolute commitment to following simple guidelines to the letter. Any deviation of these guidelines, unfortunately, can and does result in danger to the source, as we recently discovered when the French journalist deliberately breached our guidelines. Those breaches led to 1 death, Martinez Yahami, 5 people tortured, 9 people still on a DPO wanted list, 5 people arrested, 24 stringers under extreme threat and grave concerns for the safety of 38 more sources. And this is not over yet, despite those journos being safely back home in France. We've long sought, through training and support of civil media capacity building, strategies that actively confront the Indonesian media ban on West Papua by making it redundant, through engaging with Papuan voices in civil society and professional journalism to bring awareness to the international community. Some of our notable successes include helping produce a feature film with Australian director Charlie Hill-Smith called Strange Birds in Paradise, which is an honest assessment of life under Indonesian occupation. Working very regularly with Mark Davis and SBS Dateline, and Mark Davis's reports being the safe, fast in, fast out, don't stick around and muck up the story standard. He's a journalist that never goes out on the street and always looks after his sources, and that's why he can keep going back safely, even though he's very well known. But in July 2012, we set a new benchmark in professionalism for media by working with the ABC 730 report, detailing the assassination of KMPB leader Mako Tabuni, who was assassinated by the Australian trained commandos of Detachment 88. It was a simple case of agreeing to source protection, putting in encrypted technologies, not keeping handwritten notes, flying straight in, spending 3 days on the ground and then getting the hell out. And no one was detected, and the story got told. It was on air the week after for 3 days over about 5 different ABC programs. So we've used that as a benchmark ever since with all our foreign journalists who we fix for. So new projects we've guaranteed and contracted adherence to that source protection policy. Now I'll just quickly say where it went wrong. The first bad situation happened back in 2007 with Rainforest Warriors. It was a great piece, but one of the stringers on the ground insisted that he be identified because he said it doesn't matter, we're already dead. It's a huge ethical dilemma. Do you identify the people who help you put the story together? That's a debate that people have to have. We say no, but it's a choice that has to be made. Now, his entire village got raided after that. All his people got tortured. He got beaten up severely to within an inch of his life. And as a result, Channel 4 had to smuggle him out of West Papua, smuggle him to the UK and get him citizenship in the UK and look after him and resettle him. Now that is the cost of betraying your sources, and that's a responsibility that journalists have to take. Don't quite have to, in the paper I'll go into the numerous fuck-ups of Al Jazeera, the numerous deaths caused by Al Jazeera's articles, and the numerous interferences by Al Jazeera journalists who are correspondents in programs that we successfully got, and maybe we even talk about some of the resignations that happened at Al Jazeera because of that. But finally, critical questions need to be asked by everyone who wants to report on West Papua about the ongoing threats to media safety and solutions that are needed to be embraced, funded and supported by the investigative and peace journalism community in order to rediscover the core business of journalism, which is its duty to give voice to the voiceless so that it may roar. And they're having a special session on Monday, which will be some of the details in this building. It's yeah. So we're going to be giving an introduction to safe witness journalism and some of the things we train with, and what the general media community needs to do in order to create some funding for this, because it costs about $3,500 to train a journalist, and you know, that's money's got to come from somewhere. So yeah, thanks for the opportunity to give this, and I suppose we do some Q&A first time.
Thank you to our three speakers this morning.
Thank you. Cheers.
We've got now 15 minutes of questions. Given the gravity of the topics,
I'll take them both, actually.
I'd really like to throw the floor open for questions to any of our
Cheers, thanks, man.
speakers.
Thank you. No, fine. Taking it.
You have a question? Have the microphone over here. Yeah, I can take it up. It's okay. Thank you very much. I'm Mohammad from the News Agency. I'd like to address my question to Nick. Hi Nick. I'm so surprised to hear your presentation because it's very pessimistic. But for Indonesians, you know, after the victory of Joko Widodo, our president, there is a great hope in Indonesia that Indonesia will be much better, and it's for all Indonesians. But your presentation is very, very pessimistic. But I would like to hear from you your opinion about the new government, because as far as I know, that the first province that President Joko Widodo during the presidential election campaign period was Papua. So, for Indonesians, there is a great signal that the new government will do its better to improve the situations there. Okay, that's my questions. Thank you very much, Nick.
Yeah, thank you, Rahman. I agree. There's a hell of a lot of hope within Indonesia for Jokowi. He's very populist. And he has been quite genuine in his pronouncements on West Papua. But West Papua is not controlled by Jakarta. West Papua is controlled by the Indonesian military and the Indonesian police who are in West Papua. It is their own private fiefdom, and the reason they challenged Jacobi with the arrest of the two foreign journalists, the two French journalists, was deliberately a power struggle to show him, don't upset the status quo. So one of the big problems, of course, with the situation in Papua is it's 3,000 miles from Jakarta. It's a long, long way. And when Jacobi has surrounded himself in his cabinet with unreformed human rights abusers, he sent a signal to the military as well that he's not really going to challenge them. So I've got to be careful how I say this. It's very much up to the way Indonesian people hold Jacobi to his promises and take action if he doesn't fulfill his promises. I agree that Indonesian civil society is very much pro-peace in West Papua. It's not necessarily pro-independence, but it's certainly let's get this sorted out, let's have dialogue. This is a really positive sign which hasn't been there before. But at the end of the day, it's not up to the Indonesian people. It's up to the West Papuan people. And it's up to their right of self-determination being respected and their right to organise their own media and their own freedom of expression to be respected.
Thank you very much. Okay, other questions from the floor, please? I'll speak to Mike.
It's just a quick feature. Oh, thank you. I just wanted to ask, when you mentioned two international journalists in the past year, whether you were including Paul Benson and the Kiwi journalist who went in late last year or not?
I don't.
Depends how you define a year, actually, because I think it might be just slightly outside the year. But
I said 24 months, but he didn't get an official surat from Jakarta through the clearinghouse. I don't think.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah, so what I mean is two official permits that got applied for through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Information.
Okay, so one was Mark.
One was Mark, and the other was, he's a guy that got me in trouble.
It'll come to you, don't it?
The Fairfax correspondent at the moment, Michael Bachelar.
Oh.
Yes. Who exposed the fact that I was being charged and awoke all the sleeper agents in Australia to come and harass me. So.
Okay, question up here.
Hi Nick, I'd just like you to expand a little bit more on the mainstream media that won't publish stories about West Papua. It's been a concern of mine for a while that I know that there are some outlets that do deliberately take a stance that not to run things. So could you talk a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there's been a long history of Australian media outlets refusing to cover West Papua. That's absolutely correct. The problem has always been, in their eyes, that there's no credible information coming out and the West Papuans lie. Now, it's a colonial attitude that they've got. And also that the information doesn't come out fast enough. Doesn't have enough video. There's not video, for instance, of abuses when they happen. It comes out a couple of days later. It goes past the news cycle. But fundamentally, it's down to the role of certain editors who have their nice little reporting the Australia-Indonesia relationship junkets every year. All expenses and activities paid for. And there's a timidity, and part of the reason also is they haven't covered it for 20, 30 odd years, and so if they start suddenly covering it, people would start asking, well, why didn't you cover it before? So the default is silence. Sorry to be cynical.
Okay, and questions, many questions over here. Right.
Yes, I'd like to ask Ricardo, or actually both of the people from Fiji, would you say that at the moment there are serious stories that should be exposed that journalists are aware of that are not currently being covered in Fiji as a result of the very difficult environment that you've described? And thank you very much for that, because I found it both papers extremely informative. And can you just say what types of stories they would be? You know, if there was a more open environment, what sorts of issues do you think will be coming to the fore?
Yeah, thank you for the question. There are a lot of stories, as you can imagine, after so many years of official censorship and then a media decree. I mean, the Auditor General's report itself, as a good example, after that threat last week of legal action, whatever reporting had been taking place about the report, about the Auditor General's report, suddenly stopped. I mean, if the media organizations were confident of their own work, they would be able to continue, because all they were outlining was what the Auditor General had highlighted and that had been laid before Parliament, therefore privilege, and it wasn't anything extra that they were doing. But I'm looking at some of the reports from Fiji, they suddenly stopped. I mean, and because we suddenly had 29 volumes of these reports are dumped on us suddenly, the easy thing to do is just not to touch it, just leave it, So some of the media had been going through, and there have been some stories coming up. But again, it's not just going through the reports and saying, oh, the General said this and said that. It's I suppose spending time, combing through it and linking things up together. And a lot of the time, it's not because of the media environment. It's other factors, like the fact that we, don't have enough journalists to go around. They don't specialize. They don't generally specialize in Fiji. So it's just news reporting. It's just come to work in the morning, get your assignments, go out, do it, go home. There's no. I think the media companies don't give their journalists enough time, to focus on one thing, one story, say, or a set of stories, and investigate these stories. So journalists don't get any time to do anything apart from news. So a lot of the time it's not just because of the environment, it's commercial reasons. I'm sorry.
Okay, now we have two more questions, one over here and one up the back. So this one, could you come down?
Thank you. Look, I'd just like to comment on all the speakers on their presentations. They're all very good, I may say so. Excellent presentations. But my question comes back to Nick. I was interested in your observations about Al Jazeera. Can you just elaborate a bit on the problem with Al Jazeera?
Yeah. Look, we've had a very, I'd like to say a love and hate relationship with Al Jazeera, but it's mainly been hate. For many years, we've worked with a number of Al Jazeera outlets, People in Power, Witness, News Division, AJE, AJUS, and there's always been a level of editorial interference. So they'll commission a project, for instance. A film will get done, And then at the last moment, when the press releases have been put out and everything, they'll get a call from the Indonesian Foreign Ministry who threaten, Umar reprisals, like Islamic community reprisals, or Umar investment issues. And at the last moment, it gets pulled. There's also an issue with the Jakarta correspondent Step Bassen, who personally intervenes every time a West Papua story goes to air that she hasn't produced. There's also the issue that most of her footage is actually ours and has been used without credit or permission. The list goes on. Most Al Jazeera projects get cancelled after they've deployed people out into the field. So they spend money, they produce it, and then it gets cancelled right at the end. So there's a debris field of ex-Al Jazeera employees who've dealt with West Papua and who are very, very angry about the whole situation. But, you know, on the flip side, that makes good potential workers for us. So.
Okay. Now we had another question at the back here.
But I can keep going, there's a lot more.
Okay.
Thank you. My question is directed at Mr. Shailendra. In your presentation, you said the 2013 Constitution Bill of Rights enshrines press freedom, but paradoxically, the Constitution restrains government decrees would prevail over the constitutional provision. If there are any inconsistencies, you said media decree is more powerful than the Fiji Constitution. I'm rather taken aback by this circumstance. Constitutions are or should be the final and conclusive reference point in the event of any conflict. Have there been any challenges to this apparent supremacy of the media decrees? It would seem to me that this tension can be quite easily resolved by the country's judiciary, or have I misunderstood something?
You understood me perfectly. There's even a law in the Constitution that allows, in the decree, that disallows any legal challenge. So you can't even take the issue to court according to the Constitution and the decree. And this is why I say the media decree is more powerful than the Constitution. And I pose the question whether there is such a precedent in any other country or not.
And the question of the Bill of Rights in the Constitution, yes, the Constitution has provisions for freedom of expression and freedom of information, but apart from the right to life, every other right has a limiting clause. So you have the right to freedom of expression, but the government has the right to limit it. And you have the right to freedom of information, but you can bring a law to limit it. So this goes on and on all throughout the Bill of Rights, except the right to life. But in the first draft of the Constitution that they released earlier in the year, there was a big outcry when even the right to life was limited. So in the final draft, in the final version of the Constitution, they removed the limitation on the right to life. So only that stands as everyone has the right to life, but then everything else has a limitation to it. So
just one quick last word. There's a lot of debate amongst academics and journalists, and there's a big hue and cry about this decree and all that. It seems among sections of the population at least, there's some support because they apparently see the media as troublemakers. I'm not saying it's widespread, but there are sections of the population that feel this way.
Okay, now we have time for one last question. We have a hand that was up the back up here, so we'll take this as our last question for the session.
This will be good for fitness.
Oh, absolutely.
Leader from QUT. another question about Fiji. Putting aside the law and, let's say, moving around it, technically it looks as though you'd have an option of exporting stories, re-importing them through from Australian media, BBC, India. Is this regime technically up to blocking that?
Sorry, I didn't quite get the question. What was it about?
Well, if you discover something,
Right.
you can sell it to the BBC or give it to Australian media or media in India to rebroadcast or publish it in Fiji. Can they, how are they competent to block that?
Yeah, I mean that I'm sure there's a degree somewhere that I don't know of that prohibits something like that. But what you're talking about probably we talked about yesterday. Our colleague Edwin Andrew sent footage to TVNZ without prior permission, and he got in trouble. But that was during the troubles, and that was before the election. But even if we do send it to, say, for example, some international outlet, maybe Al Jazeera, I mean, Fiji is such a small place, it's not hard to figure out the source of such an article. I was once interviewed by BBC, but I had my, they blurred my face, changed my voice, but my mother was on the phone the next day saying, "What were you doing on TV?" So, anybody who knows, when Fiji is a small place, they most likely know you. So yeah, it's very hard to do anything anonymously.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, everybody, for your questions. That brings this session to an end.